first time I noticed her, I didn't think much of it. Just another neighbor, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp like a hawk. But then came the warning note on my door. Grass too tall. Leaves on the driveway. Please comply immediately. HOA enforcement in effect. Signed, Karen M. And yes, her real name was Karen. You couldn't make this up. I stepped outside that morning, coffee in hand, hoping to enjoy a little Saturday peace. The sky was grey, low clouds threatening rain. I watched as Karen stomped down her walkway, heels clicking like a metronome. Her dog, a tiny yappy thing, tugged on the leash, but her attention wasn't on it. No, it was on me, on the crime scene that was my perfectly normal lawn. I waved politely, trying to diffuse the tension. "Morning, Karen," I said. She paused mid-step, eyes narrowing. "Do you see these weeds? This is unacceptable. I've already filed a complaint with the HOA." She snapped, her voice cutting through the morning quiet. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard correctly. "Filed a complaint? For my grass?" "Yes, and I expect it to be corrected by today," she barked, like she was handing down a federal order. I wanted to laugh, honestly. The audacity of it. But something in her tone told me she wasn't joking, and that's when the fear set in. HOA complaints could escalate fast, and she had a reputation. People whispered about her Karen powers, the way she could make life miserable for anyone she chose. Later that afternoon, the first sign of real trouble arrived. Flashing red and blue lights reflected in my window. The cops were here, for my lawn. I stepped outside, palms raised, trying to look cooperative. "Afternoon, officers," I said. "I assume this is about the grass situation?" One of them gave me a sympathetic look. "We got a call about a possible disturbance," he said, eyes flicking toward Karen, who stood on her porch, arms crossed, glaring like a hawk spotting prey. "We'll just ask a few questions." Karen approached, voice sweet but venomous. "I'm afraid he's been violating HOA rules for weeks," she said, tilting her head. I had no choice but to call the authorities. I could feel my blood boil. Weeks. She had been watching me, noting every leaf, every imperfection, plotting her little power plays. And now, the cops were here, humoring her theatrics. As the officers took notes, I tried to explain calmly, but it was like speaking to statues. Karen smiled, smug and victorious. My Saturday was ruined, and I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the opening act. I stormed inside, heart pounding, frustration simmering. I brewed another coffee, staring out the window at Karen surveying her kingdom. That's when the thought hit me. If she wanted drama, maybe it was time I gave her a taste of her own medicine. And that's when the plan began to form. The next morning began with the kind of silence that feels staged, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Birds weren't chirping, no lawnmowers humming, not even the usual distant sound of kids fighting over a basketball. It was too quiet. Karen. Quiet. I stepped onto my porch with my mug, scanning the street. And there she was, standing dead center on her driveway, hands on her hips, staring right at my house like a general surveying enemy territory. Her yappy dog barked once and fell silent, almost as if even it didn't want to interrupt her concentration. I knew she was waiting for something, waiting for me to slip up. But today, I wasn't the one on defense. I walked over casually. "Morning again, Karen," I said, voice light, maybe too light. She frowned. "You still haven't cleaned the driveway properly," she snapped. "That debris can't stay there. HOA requires—" "Relax," I cut in, smiling. "Already handled." Her eyes flicked to my driveway. Freshly blown, spotless, cleaner than hers in fact. She didn't like that. Her face tightened, jaw clenching. "This neighborhood has standards," she said stiffly. "And I'm meeting them," I replied, matching her tone but keeping my smile. "You should be proud." She didn't speak. She just stared at me, like she was trying to figure out which rule she could weaponize next. And that's when I struck. "By the way," I added casually, "I read through the HOA guidelines last night. Super interesting stuff." Her eyes twitched. She knew I'd found something. "You see, after the cops left the day before, I spent hours combing through the HOA manual. It turns out Karen, in all her rule-obsessed glory, had been violating multiple guidelines herself. Unapproved modifications to her porch railing, a decorative yard flag that was too large by HOA standards. Even her trash cans were stored incorrectly. Karen, the queen of compliance, had built her kingdom on violations. I didn't confront her directly, not yet. No, I wanted the reveal to hit harder. So instead, I made a little anonymous report to the HOA that morning. Nothing harsh, just factual, documented, thorough. At around noon, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. A white sedan. HOA emblazoned on the side. Karen walked out, confused, adjusting her robe like she wasn't prepared for an audience. The HOA rep stepped out, clipboard in hand. The exact same clipboard she loved to wield. I watched from my window as they walked her property, pointing at things, shaking their head, writing notes. Karen's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to raw, silent rage. Her own rules, her own weapons, turned against her. By the time they left, she looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Her hair was a mess, her face red, and she paced her driveway like she was replaying the humiliation in her mind. That night, my phone buzzed with a short, sharp message from an unknown number. I know what you did. No name, no threats, just that. The silence afterward was louder than any scream. And I knew this wasn't over. It was about to get worse. By the following week, the neighborhood felt different. The air had a strange electric tension, like everyone subconsciously knew the quiet war brewing behind my house. Every time I stepped outside, I felt her gaze, sharp and calculating, boring into my back. Karen had shifted from general annoyance to active strategizing, and it was terrifying. And, admittedly, satisfying. It started small, a complaint about my garden gnome, which now apparently violated some obscure HOA aesthetic guideline. Then, my mailbox. She swore it was crooked and had filed another report. I watched as she walked her daily patrols, carrying her clipboard like a weapon of justice. But I wasn't hiding anymore. I was ready to escalate. But smartly, I had a plan, subtle, surgical, and utterly satisfying. It began with little coincidences around her property. A rogue sprinkler mysteriously watering her pristine flower beds at 7 a.m. A few of her carefully raked leaves suddenly blown back onto her lawn. I didn't hide. I waved when she glared from her porch, innocently sipping my coffee as if nothing were happening. Then came the HOA letters. Official-looking envelopes arrived at her door, each carefully typed with exact references to rule violations she had overlooked for years. Porch railing, paint color, flag dimensions, garbage placement. Each one cited the bylaws word for word, with dates, diagrams, and signatures from concerned neighbors. All factual, all true. I watched her from the window as she tore them open one by one. First disbelief, then panic, then her trademark rage boiling to the surface. She stomped down the street, waving the letters, muttering, yelling. Her neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some shaking their heads in sympathy, or maybe amusement. And then, the phone calls started. Anonymous, persistent. Each one a calm voice reading rules, quoting bylaws, asking her politely to comply. The messages were polite, but the effect was devastating. She was losing her composure, little by little, as if the universe had decided to mirror her obsession back at her. One evening, she pounded on my door. I opened it casually, leaning against the frame. "Who's doing this? I know it's you!" she yelled, hair in disarray, eyes wild. I smiled faintly, calm, deliberate. "You don't need to know, Karen. Maybe you should just read the HOA guidelines more carefully." Her jaw dropped. She sputtered, searching for words, but none came. She turned on her heel, storming back to her kingdom. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the quiet neighborhood. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Karen had been a storm in my life, relentless and chaotic. But now, the storm had a taste of its own medicine. Perfectly measured, lawful, undeniable. Still, deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Karen didn't give up easily. If anything, she would escalate. And I had to be ready. The chess game had entered the middle moves, and both of us were circling, calculating, waiting for the other to make a mistake. And I had a feeling. She was about to make a big one. The tension hit a breaking point one Saturday morning. I was sipping coffee on my porch, eyes scanning the street, when I saw her, Karen, marching toward me, face red with fury, a fresh stack of HOA letters clutched in her hands like weapons. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, a real HOA inspector trailed, clipboard ready, serious expression on his face. I knew the game had reached its climax. "Good morning," I said casually, standing tall, my coffee mug extended like a shield. She spun on me, almost yelling, "This has to stop! I demand to know who is behind these—" Before she could finish, the HOA inspector stepped in. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the complaints," he said, voice firm. "Most of them are valid. Your property is in violation on several counts. We need you to address them immediately." Karen froze, blinking in disbelief. "Wait, what?" I leaned against the railing, my calm contrasting sharply with her meltdown. "Funny, isn't it? All the rules you've been waving at everyone else, they apply to you too." Her hands shook as she rifled through her letters. This isn't possible." The inspector nodded politely. "It's all documented. By law, we have to enforce it equally. You'll need to make the corrections within 30 days. I could see the color drain from her face. Her carefully constructed world of power, control, and intimidation had cracked. The same rules she had weaponized against me were now hammering down on her, relentless and unyielding. Karen turned toward me, rage and desperation mixing in her eyes. "You did this. You're behind this, aren't you?" I smiled faintly, shrugging, taking a sip of coffee. "I just read the HOA guidelines. Figured they're more interesting when applied evenly." She stared, speechless, her mind racing, trying to find a loophole, a defense, anything. But there was none. Every rule she had ignored, every technicality she had exploited against neighbors was now turned back on her. The inspector cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we'll follow up next week. Please cooperate." Karen's shoulders slumped, the fight finally leaving her body. She turned and stormed back to her house, muttering under her breath, papers rustling in the wind. For the first time in years, she wasn't the neighborhood queen, the omnipotent enforcer. She was just another neighbor. I stood there a moment longer, letting the silence sink in. The birds had returned, the distant hum of life resuming its rhythm. A strange calm filled the street. And then, as if to remind me the battle was never truly over, I felt her glare from across the road, her yappy dog barking furiously. But I didn't care. I'd played fair, followed the rules, and watched karma unfold in the most satisfying way. As I sipped the last of my coffee, I smiled, shaking my head. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't chaos. It's law, order, and a little patience. Karen had called the cops on me, tried to ruin my weekends, and pushed everyone around. But in the end, she'd learned something essential. You can't live in a kingdom of rules if you refuse to follow them yourself. And somewhere deep down, I knew. If she ever tried this again, I'd be ready. If this Karen story hit home, tap like, because justice starts with standing up, not sitting down. Subscribe to Karen Edition to catch every real-life showdown where ordinary people fight back. And tell me below, how would you handle a neighbor like this?